I knew the moment she said it. That smirk was going to cost her everything. Linda Hargrove, Willow Creek, HOA president for 8 unbearable years, had that polished PowerPoint confidence of a woman who thought community standards were just a buzzword she invented over mimosas. She spun her monogrammed pen like it made her smarter, then dropped the line with a chuckle that echoed off the fake wood paneling of the community center. Your title sounds a little too fancy, Sarah. We can't afford a compliance and records officer anymore. The other board members nodded like trained seals. Not one of them asked about the audit logs, the violation database I built from scratch, or the chain of custody system that kept every fine, every dues payment, and every meeting minute legally airtight. HR, if you can call the neighbor who sells essential oils HR, slid the termination letter across the table like it was a grocery list. No thank you for the 8 years I spent turning their chaotic Google Drive into something that actually passed state audits. No handover plan. Just a cardboard box and a polite escort to the parking lot. Behind Linda, the whiteboard still screamed in dry erase red. Q2 compliance submission, next week. Nobody bothered to erase it. I didn't argue. Arguing with a woman who believed Excel filters counted as cutting-edge automation was like debating a stop sign. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked out with the kind of quiet dignity that makes petty tyrants nervous. Back at my desk, in the tiny community office I paid for out of my own pocket, I closed out the final validation script with fingers that had danced this exact routine 1,000 times. Open the master drive, authenticate twice, export clean archives, generate cryptographic hashes, encrypt, timestamp, store. The last thing I ran caught 11 line item anomalies in the draft Q2 report sitting in the shared folder. Tiny things like a $312 landscaping invoice that magically became $31.20 after Linda reviewed it. I flagged them out of habit, even though I knew nobody would read it. They'd already decided who they wanted to be without me. The new ops lead, Linda's best friend from book club, a former real estate agent who once asked me if PDFs could expire, had already renamed my meticulously organized folder from Quarterly Reconciliation Verified V8 to Q2 Final Live V2 Clean 3 cleans. That's how you know it's a dumpster fire. My job wasn't glamorous. It was buried under spreadsheets and scanned violation photos of lawns cut 0.2 inches too short. But it was the backbone. Every state-mandated financial disclosure, every enforcement action that kept the neighborhood from being sued into oblivion, every single fine we'd ever collected had passed clean because of the versioning framework I wrote when no one was looking. You don't notice record integrity until the moment it's gone. Then it's a forest fire, quiet until it eats the whole damn homeowners association. I pulled out a thumb drive I'd never labeled just in case someone got nosy. One by one, I saved every reconciliation report, every ledger discrepancy notice, every change log. Not to leak, not to sabotage, just so the truth would have a place to live. As a courtesy, not to them, but to the concept of order, I sent a sealed archive to the HOA's external counsel with a subject line. Per compliance continuity. No note. If they knew what they were doing, they'd understand. At 5:01 p.m. My access badge went dark. At 5:04 p.m. I saw the alert pop up on a legacy monitoring system they forgot to revoke. Someone was editing the Q2 script. Same folder, same name, new timestamp. I watched the hash shift like a twitch in a corpse. They were rewriting history without the architecture, without the logs, without the protections that made the math legal. I didn't watch long. I closed the laptop, placed it on the desk, and left the office without a sound. No drama. No scene, no farewell cake. I didn't even take the stupid pen with my name on it. Because I knew something Linda didn't. Numbers don't care about your ego. They care about the truth. And I had the only copy that still knew what that was. They were already rewriting the ending before I'd even closed a chapter. Post-departure assumptions. That was the header they bolded in a new master file, underlined like it had survived a branding review. A whole section dedicated to hand-waving away the audit trails I'd spent a decade perfecting. I clicked through from my couch. My framework was still there, but hacked to pieces. They'd renamed key fields, overwritten comparison functions, and commented out entire lines of conditional logic. One edit actually said in plain English, skip integrity verification if delay 72 hours. They didn't fix the workflow. They just told it to ignore reality if reality showed up late. Someone inserted a note at the bottom. Legacy logic retired as of May 5th. Departure. No replacement module. No regression test. Just a digital shrug and a ticking time bomb. I pulled it all. Every last byte. The versioning schema I built was airtight. Each archive locked with a hash, cross-referenced with filing metadata, signed with a chain of custody traceable through both internal compliance and external legal timestamping. The kind of framework that made state regulators sleep easy. The kind that never got applause, but always kept the HOA out of court. I exported not just the files, but the logic itself. Recursive validation layers, change detection modules, escalation triggers that pinged when even a single cell didn't line up with source data. That's the part Linda never saw. The engine humming beneath her perfectly curated violation photos of my neighbor's flagpole being 0.3 inches too tall. They'd grown so used to hitting generate and watching magic happen that they forgot who kept the wires from crossing. As I zipped the last package and encrypted the drive, I realized they didn't even know what they were losing. They thought the risk lived in numbers that didn't add up. But the real risk was in the silence between the numbers, the checks, the counters, the sanity controls that kept bad data from becoming bad decisions. I was the wall that caught the lie before it metastasized. And now that wall had been fired. I opened the audit trail tool one last time. My account was still active because nobody had updated access governance. There was again, Q2 Final V2 Clean Live. Modified 3 times in the last hour by someone in Ops, Linda's book club friend who once asked me, no joke, if CSV files could expire. That same person had clicked Approve on a financial integrity flagment for Tier 3 review. They didn't even know the flag existed until it popped up red, so they clicked it green like a button in a game. This wasn't malice. That would have required intent. This was something worse. Blind faith in systems they never understood. I ran one final reconciliation on the Q2 preview, just out of morbid curiosity. It flagged inconsistencies in 6 reporting rows, not large enough to scream fraud, but enough to raise eyebrows, enough to trigger a deeper state audit if anyone noticed. And if no one noticed, bad data would cascade until the entire association was floating on an ocean of fiction, smiling, waving, already sunk. The sad part? It didn't have to go this way. I'd left documentation, internal wikis, training videos, diagrams. Hell, I'd even built an interactive walkthrough called How Not to Get Audited into Oblivion. But that required humility. And no one in that board had time for humility. They wanted speed. I gave them certainty. They threw out both. As I packed the drive, I labeled the archive contingency, do not edit. I meant it literally, but I also meant it like a prayer. Because if anyone touched this version, the whole house would fall. And even then, it would fall quietly. No explosion, no scandal. Just a state regulator asking one calm, surgical question, why doesn't this match? And I already knew the answer. They thought the truth was optional. It was surreal watching them start the fire from the safety of my couch. I'd barely kicked off my shoes when the first alert hit. I still had visibility through the legacy monitoring system, an oversight on their part. Or maybe they just assumed I was bluffing when I said I built the architecture myself. They didn't understand that systems don't forget their architects. Not unless you rip them out by the roots. And they never even checked the roots. 5:04 p.m. Exactly 3 minutes after my badge went dark, I saw the first change. The reporting tool's version control pinged with a rename, Q2 Final V2, modified by the book club ops lead. He was now apparently in charge of the final attested financial disclosure for a legally regulated homeowners association. I clicked into the change log. It wasn't cosmetic. They deleted the validation step that flagged reconciliation mismatches above a 0.2% threshold. That one check was the reason we'd passed every state audit without exception for 6 years. It was buried deep in the pre-processing script. Not labeled, not pretty, just effective. They replaced it with a manual checkbox labeled Visual Review Complete. Visual review, like eyeballing a spreadsheet with your morning mimosa, was equivalent to forensic-grade record integrity. Another change. Someone removed the delta tracking between dues inflows and custodial receipts, which meant if timestamps didn't sync to bank data, no one would know. Not unless they manually combed through logs, which, let's be honest, nobody on that board was ever going to do, especially not now that I was gone. What chilled me wasn't that they were altering the reports. It was that they didn't think it mattered. I watched the trail update, dozens of micro-edits, inline field changes, overrides of auto-generated summaries, and no one stopped them because they'd killed the only role whose job it was to stop them. The reporting software was screaming silently in the background. Warnings logged, flags raised, checks bypassed. But none of those warnings went anywhere anymore. I'd built escalation trees, yes, but they were rooted in named roles, and those roles had been scrubbed when they fired me. They hadn't just removed the person, they'd erased the function. That's why I made the copy. It wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Sooner or later, someone was going to fall, and I wanted the parachute ready. Not to save them, but to prove I'd warned them quietly, legally, irrefutably. The archive sat on my desk, still warm from the right process, encrypted, sealed, hash-signed. One copy stored offline. One sent with surgical professionalism to the HOA's external legal firm. I kept the subject line plain. Archive per compliance continuity. No flourish, no threats. Just the truth preserved like amber. I didn't include a message. I didn't need to. The hash alone was enough. If they ever submitted a filing that didn't match it exactly and the state got curious, the trail would lead straight to the discrepancy. And now that they'd removed all audit breaks and validation fences, I had a feeling the discrepancy wasn't months away. It was days. Back on the screen, the new version name blinked into place. Q2 Final V2 President Reviewed.xlsx. I didn't smile. I didn't get up. I just watched it save. Because here's the thing about systems with no compliance officer. They don't collapse with a bang. They rot from inside quietly, softly, while the numbers still look pretty, until the moment someone holds them up to the light and sees right through them. Meanwhile, life in Willow Creek went on exactly as petty as ever. Linda started enforcing the rules with fresh vengeance. My mailbox was cited for being 0.1 inches off center, even though I'd measured it with a laser level the day before. My lawn, still exactly 3 inches because I'm not an animal, was flagged for visual inconsistency after she drove by at 7 a.m. with her little golf cart and binoculars. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with her carefully worded posts. Some former board members seem to think rules are optional now that they're no longer in charge. We must protect property values, friends. The comments poured in. Typical entitled millennial. She always was too obsessed with paperwork. Good riddance. Now we can actually enjoy the community pool without spreadsheets. I read every single one from my couch, sipping coffee, watching the hash alerts pile up. Inside the share drive, Linda and her crew were busy. They reclassified a $4,800 President's Discretionary Fund expense, actually her daughter's quinceanera catering, as emergency tree trimming. They backdated violation notices so her golf cart buddy's ugly political flag could stay up past the 30-day limit. They even deleted 3 entire months of meeting minutes where I'd recorded her voting to waive her own late dues penalty. Visual review complete. I didn't intervene. I just kept the archive warm and waited. The Q2 report was supposed to be routine, a box to tick, a breeze through the state-mandated disclosure that no one ever looked at twice because, well, it always passed. But this time something caught. A junior examiner at the State Department of Community Affairs ran a standard custodial match check, one I'd helped design years ago when the compliance budget was still funded. It was meant to flag timing issues between bank receipts and internal reporting. Harmless stuff? usually human error. But this time it didn't bounce back a polite yellow warning. It went red. Disbursements and receipts weren't aligning. The deltas were small, subtle even, but persistent. 0.5% here. A few thousand shifted across end-of-quarter rollovers. Nothing explosive, but off. And off is enough when you're a legally incorporated homeowners association required to file accurate financials or face fines. Then came the file metadata. One of the embedded source spreadsheets had a last modified timestamp that read July 17th, 2 days after I was terminated, 2 days after I lost access, 2 days after the person listed in the attestation section. Linda Hargrove signed off saying all data was reviewed, verified, and unchanged from the control version. Only it had been changed. When the state examiner called the board out, they didn't flinch. They called it minor post-processing for presentation clarity. Someone in ops had cleaned up labels and standardized column names. A harmless beautification exercise, they said, until the hash didn't match. The examiner compared the submitted Q2 file against the reference archive on record, the one sent from external counsel, the one I had sealed, time-stamped, and hash-locked before walking out that door. Mismatch. Now things got dicey. In a perfect world, a mismatch is just a red flag. It prompts clarification. But in this case, the association had submitted a sworn attestation that the data was accurate and unchanged as of the review date. And that statement carried legal weight, not just with the examiner, but with the state attorney general's office. The examiner reached out to the law firm on file. Not internal counsel. External. The one that handled filings, governance, and crucially compliance handovers. That's when the folder was opened. The partner forwarded the exact file I had sent. Archive per compliance continuity. Same timestamp, same signature, same hash, no commentary. Just a file. That was all it took. Because now the state had 2 versions of the same submission. One verified and sealed before the filing window closed. The other marked final with edits applied post-departure by a user who wasn't on the access log as an authorized editor. The moment that file landed in their inbox, it stopped being a clerical discrepancy. It became evidence. And evidence means inquiry. They started slow, asking questions about change logs, access controls, governance procedures. The board fumbled through their responses, assuming this was just an overzealous audit. They didn't realize the tone had shifted. This wasn't about finding a mistake. This was about proving intent. They had certified a version that no longer existed. They had claimed continuity where none had been preserved. And the only version that still matched the custodial trail, the one with every anomaly flagged, every value checked, every formula locked, was mine. That's the thing about data. It doesn't shout. It whispers quietly. In time signatures, in hash collisions, in change logs left behind by people who thought deleting a cell was the same as erasing a fact. Linda doubled down. I heard later she told them it was all standard post-processing. Swore that no material figures had been altered, that it was just label harmonization. Tried to reframe the issue as a formatting difference. But the examiner didn't care about formatting. They cared about the hash. And the hash said, this file has been changed. The wrong file, the wrong date, the wrong name on the wrong report, and someone was going to answer for it. The video call was brutal. Linda blinked like the webcam was lying. The lead examiner didn't flinch, just held the page steady right up to the lens. You're at a station, she said again, tapping her pen against the printed signature. You swore this document was accurate and unchanged as of June 15th, 5 p.m. Linda nodded stiffly. Yes, at that time it was. The examiner didn't even bother with a pause. The version you submitted was modified on July 17th at 2:13 p.m., specifically by a user who did not have financial edit permissions. A user from Book Club Ops? Do you remember authorizing that change? Linda leaned back, hands raised like this was all beneath her. It was a delegated update, non-substantive, cosmetic labeling, titles and column headers, presentation clarity. The numbers were untouched. The examiner tilted her head. That's not what the audit log shows. She turned the page and read aloud. Column custodial flow date was reformatted and 3 entries were manually realigned to end-of-quarter batch processing. Value impact, $38,761 across 3 rows. Classification shift, delayed receipt to expected. That's not cosmetic misses. Hargrove, that's a timing reclassification. Linda started to speak again, but the examiner didn't let her. Instead, she shared her screen. Up popped the system access designation list. Names, roles, active dates. Let's walk through access roles, she said, voice level. Who had integrity sign-off authority at the time of this submission? Linda stared blankly. The examiner highlighted my name. Here's who. Last recorded certified compliance officer through the June 15th reporting window. No transfer of duty filed. No interim officer named. No system update submitted. Which means the chain of custody for this report ended when she walked out that door. The call went dead silent, and then came the hammer. Mrs. Hargrove, under State Community Association statute, any post-filing data alteration without certified oversight is considered a breach of record integrity controls, especially when it results in materially different classifications. Linda tried to shift gears. We believe she left documentation continuity protocols. She emailed archives, didn't she? The examiner smiled thinly. Yes, she did. To external counsel. A sealed, time-stamped, hash-matched archive. We've compared it to what you submitted. They're not the same. Silence again. Then she asked the real question. Why was her name still listed as compliance officer, but no continuity plan filed? Why didn't anyone revoke her designation before submitting altered data? Linda stammered. We assumed the system would update automatically. Compliance isn't automatic, the examiner replied. It's documented. It's signed. And in this case, it wasn't. She clicked one last tab. The system's attestation record. Linda's digital signature lit up in blue. My name sat just beneath it in gray, still tied to the validation node that ran the last authorized report. From where I sit, the examiner said, voice cooling, you submitted a filing under another person's certified integrity layer, made changes after their authority expired, and failed to disclose those edits. Whether or not you understood the impact is irrelevant. The word hung there, irrelevant, like a diagnosis. Because it was no longer about intent. It was about control. Chain of custody. And in their arrogance, they'd never even thought to sever it. They just kept filing, kept tweaking, kept assuming the system would clean up after them. But I hadn't built a system to clean up after arrogance. I'd built one to expose it. And now it was doing exactly what I designed it to do. By the time the penalty hit, I was halfway through onboarding a logistics analytics firm that actually knew what chain of custody meant. They didn't blink when I asked about double authenticated workflows. They didn't scoff at the word integrity. In fact, they offered me equity during the second interview. So when an email landed in my inbox, forwarded from a neighbor still trapped inside that sinking ship, it felt like watching an old high school rival drive her dad's Lexus straight into a pond. Subject line, regulatory ruling. Final determination. They'd receive a notice of material misstatement triggered automatically. No courtroom drama, no drawn-out hearings, just a formula, a calculator built into the compliance framework I'd once helped beta test. Cold as concrete and just as final. Total fine, $1.73 million. I did the math in my head. That was 7 times my last recorded annual volunteer stipend, rounded of course. The framework always used salary as a multiplier for negligence-based penalties when a certified function was removed without documentation. The state didn't care about the board's excuses. They cared about the data. And the data said they altered a sealed filing and didn't report it. Linda tried to fight it. That was almost cute. She issued a formal complaint through in-house counsel, claiming I had failed to sufficiently document my handover. Said I had left incomplete files and ambiguous continuity. The response from the examiner was surgical. They attached the hash report matching the archive I sent before my badge was cut. They attached the email log time-stamped, digitally signed, received by both external counsel and the compliance inbox. They attached the change log showing exactly when the edits were made, by whom, and without any certification authority present. Then, they added a final paragraph. The issue is not the absence of documentation. It is the presence of undocumented alterations after certified integrity oversight was terminated. The chain of custody was broken. The burden is not on the departed officer to remain. The burden is on the submitting party to preserve accuracy and auditability. That's regulator speak for. This is your screw-up, not hers. I heard through the grapevine, naturally, that Linda's next step was trying to get the board to push back, demand leniency, argue the penalty down. Didn't happen. Because once the report went public, the homeowners saw the language, material misstatement. Not a footnote, not a retraction, a legal label, one that implies fraud, incompetence, or both. And penalties don't blink. They don't feel bad. They don't pause because someone in a pantsuit says, but it wasn't that bad. The moment the calculator runs, the liability becomes real and irreversible. It wasn't the fine that wrecked them. It was what the fine implied. That they had no safeguards. That their reporting could not be trusted. That they had been lucky up until now. And now the luck had run out. Their quarterly newsletter mentioned unexpected compliance costs. Didn't mention my name, of course, just like they never mentioned my name in meetings or press releases or board calls. But it was written in the fine print, in the red ink, in the silence that follows the word non-compliant. That's how you know a system failed. Not when it breaks, but when it lies quietly and says nothing and someone finally notices. The truth didn't destroy them. Their edits did. It was a Friday. Always is, isn't it? Bad news likes to land when people are 2 drinks into pretending their little kingdoms are stable. A former neighbor, one of the few who hadn't jumped on the she was just obsessed with paperwork bandwagon, sent me a cryptic text. Emergency board call. Linda's sweating. Your name came up a lot. I didn't respond. Just sat back in my chair, watching traffic crawl past the glass in my new office. I knew the script already. I'd written most of it in silence, one control at a time. The board wanted answers, not about the penalty. That was already a sunk cost. What they wanted was protection, a firewall against what might come next. Homeowner lawsuits, a nosedive in property values, loss of insurance, reputation rot, the kind that spreads slow and deep and doesn't show up on dashboards until it's metastasized. They want to know why Linda signed off on a report without a compliance officer in place. Why she hadn't filed a transition plan. Why the system still listed me as the last certified signer weeks after I was escorted out with a cardboard box and a severance packet that read like a eulogy for responsibility. Linda tried to do what presidents always do. Deflect, blame process ambiguity, blame insufficient coordination, blame legacy system complexity. Then the outside compliance partner pulled up the side-by-side. Left screen, my original sealed archive, versioned, signed, 0 deltas outside of tolerances. Right screen, their submission, altered formulas, shifted classifications, mismatched timestamps. Nothing explosive. No smoking gun. Just differences. But in compliance, differences are the gun. One missing note field. One line moved from deferred to cleared. One date nudged forward. Tiny, imperceptible tweaks. Human errors. Or so she claimed. But real. And real is enough. Enough to kill a bonus. Enough to crater property values. Enough to start a chain reaction of doubt that no neighborhood Facebook post can shut down. Homeowner confidence doesn't need proof of fraud. It just needs the scent of sloppiness. And this reeked. The board asked the obvious. Why didn't we catch this before submission? The answer was even more obvious because she was the one who always caught it, and we fired her. They didn't say it out loud, of course. Not in those words. But it hung in the air, sour and sharp. Linda tried one more angle. Claimed she believed the framework I built was still running in the background. Autopilot, she called it. The partner actually laughed. You thought integrity was a button you push. Then came the final blow. A director asked to see the system log, the one I'd quietly embedded years ago that tracked every time a report was generated without a completed validation sequence. Turns out every single draft post-departure had thrown silent errors. Red flags ignored. Scripts overwritten. Manual approvals issued by people who didn't even have security clearance for budgetary software 2 months earlier. One line in the log, time-stamped, unambiguous, read, "Integrity function disabled. User override detected." They'd never seen it because no one had checked. And suddenly, it wasn't just about the filing. It was about how many other filings had sailed through with that same warning blinking into the void. That's when the board turned quiet. Because now they weren't worried about a single fine. They were worried about contagion. Systemic failure. Pattern risk. Legal discovery. It's funny. When I was there, I was a line item. Now I was a firewall they'd torn out without knowing what it was attached to. And when the fire came, there was nothing left to stop it. Her voice was steady, almost careful, like she was afraid I might hang up before she got to the good part. "I understand if you're not interested," the new board chair said, "but the board would like to discuss a formal arrangement." I leaned back, let the silence stretch, not because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I genuinely wasn't sure if I wanted anything to do with that burning wreck of an association ever again. She continued, "We need to rebuild the compliance framework from the ground up." "I'm not coming back," I said flatly. There was a pause. I could almost hear her smile through the line. "Not as staff," she replied. "You'd report to the board. Independent. External. Your own structure. Board-level signatory rights. We want a firewall, and you already built a blueprint." I stared out the window at the rain tapping the glass. She didn't say Linda's name. She didn't have to. If she was making this call, Linda was already out of decisions, if not out of the building entirely. She'd be a footnote in the next newsletter, buried under euphemisms like transitioned or pursuing new opportunities. I told her I'd think about it. The terms arrived that night. The email was direct, no filler, just a clean 5-page PDF titled Data Governance Oversight Agreement Draft. The first clause hit hard: authority over all data submissions, attestation frameworks, and control reviews regardless of departmental hierarchy. The second, right of final halt on any regulatory filing lacking verified continuity of the integrity function. Then permanent access to the compliance framework architecture, documentation rights, and audit privilege escalation. No more chasing approvals from clueless board members. No more explaining to Karens why changing a number at 3 a.m. Without logging, it isn't just fixing a typo. And the new clause, the one someone had clearly fought for, no submission, internal or external, may proceed without a designated and verified continuity officer in place. That officer would be me. They were institutionalizing what they should have respected the first time. That integrity isn't a title. It's a function. And when you remove that function without replacing it, you're not just cutting headcount. You're cutting the brake line. And brakes don't matter until you're already rolling downhill. I read the agreement twice, then once more. It was more than an apology. It was an acknowledgement. The closest I'd ever get to someone in that building saying, "We screwed up by not listening." It wasn't about the money, though the retainer was more than generous. It was about what the role meant. Not compliance as a box check, but compliance as authority. Not just making the report clean, but making sure the story it told was true. I still didn't know if I wanted to say yes. But for the first time, they were asking the right question. Not, "Can you come back?" but, "Can you make sure this never happens again?" And that I could consider. Some wins don't come with applause, but they stay clean, like the archive I left behind.